When we turn on the news and see coverage of global conflict zones, our eyes are, naturally drawn to the obvious stuff, right? Military escalations, shifting borders, economic sanctions, the whole shebang. But what if we've been looking at the wrong map entirely? Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today, we're exploring the seriously groundbreaking, data-driven research of Savio Antonio Vogt to examine a radical paradigm shift in how we view education in the world's most volatile regions. Usually, we look at treaties and troops to measure stability, but Vogt asks us to look somewhere completely different, at classrooms, laboratories, and the minds of the students inside them.
It's a question that kind of challenges the very foundation of how we think about humanitarian aid. If you look closely at regions experiencing prolonged, devastating instability, what is the absolute first critical asset to actually vanish? It's probably not what you think. It's not the physical buildings or the compromised borders or even the collapsed power grids. Take a second to really think about what underpins a society's survival.
The answer? It's long-term recovery capacity. The research reveals a pretty sobering truth here. Nations begin losing their ability to rebuild long before the shooting actually stops. Imagine a ceasefire assigned tomorrow. Who reconstructs the power grid? Who runs the hospitals? When universities collapse and research laboratories are destroyed, that vital pipeline of engineers, doctors, and scientists completely fragments. And that damage, it doesn't just last for a news cycle, it lasts for generations. Without its educated workforce, a nation simply cannot recover.
So here is the roadmap for our explainer today. 1. The hidden casualty of conflict. 2. Education as strategic infrastructure. 3. Educational deterrence, Sino-Indian frontier. 4. Astronomy diplomacy in Kashmir. 5. Scientific corridors, Israel-Palestine. And 6. A new blueprint for peace.
Let's start with Section 1, the hidden casualty of conflict. Wars don't just destroy buildings. They destroy institutional continuity.
Traditional humanitarian aid often treats education as an afterthought, Like it's something to fix after the dust settles and physical security is restored. But Vogt's data shows exactly why this is a massive strategic error. When you map out the specific pressures of conflict zones, the causal links are just devastating. Displacement doesn't just mean kids miss a few days of school. It triggers a total collapse of refugee education. When physical infrastructure is destroyed, a nation permanently loses its critical research laboratories. And the most dangerous pressure point of all, the absolute depletion of the STEM workforce. Without institutional memory, areas like Afghanistan and Syria show us that this prolonged educational vacuum severely accelerates extremist recruitment and creates permanent labor fragility. It's a domino effect.
Moving on to Section 2. Education as strategic infrastructure, shifting the paradigm from passive social service to critical national asset.
To truly grasp this paradigm shift, we really have to understand the concept of scientific sovereignty. This is basically the ability of a nation to maintain technological independence through stable educational pipelines in STEM and advanced research. Think of it like this. A country might successfully defend its political borders, but if its research universities are hollowed out, it becomes entirely reliant on foreign powers for cybersecurity, medical innovation, and aerospace tech. It is stripped of its ability to be self-sufficient. Without continuous, advanced education, a nation's true sovereignty is effectively surrendered.
And this brings us to a really fascinating contrast in how we manage geopolitics and instability. Traditional diplomacy, military deployments, ceasefires, managing logistics, and sanctions is highly reactive. It's essentially about putting out a fire that has already started. Educational diplomacy, on the other hand, that's preventative fireproofing. By actively prioritizing STEM infrastructure and aggressive talent retention, it ensures that a region doesn't culturally or economically hollow out. It maintains a baseline of scientific continuity even when political tensions inevitably boil over.
Which leads us to Section 3, Educational Deterrence, Sino-Indian Frontier, preserving scientific competitiveness across the Himalayas. Now, this particular frontier is almost exclusively analyzed through the lens of troop movements, naval models, and physical border skirmishes. But Vogt's research asks us to zoom in on the laboratories instead. Both India and China have massive, competing ambitions in artificial intelligence, aerospace, and advanced manufacturing. In this high-stakes environment, retaining highly skilled talent acts as a literal form of deterrence. A state can lose a strategic competition not by losing a physical battle, but through repeated educational disruptions in sensitive border regions. By preserving stable, uninterrupted pipelines for aerospace engineers and astronomers in these zones, a nation utilizes talent retention to exert a powerful, non-combative defense. This is what we call educational deterrence, and it completely safeguards long-term scientific competitiveness.
Let's look at Section 4, Astronomy, Diplomacy, and Kashmir. Low-cost, neutral educational corridors between adversarial regions. Kashmir is an area heavily marked by physical instability, interrupted schooling, and the constant looming threat of a massive educational vacuum. So how do you stabilize a region where a physical school might not even survive the month? Well, VOC proposes something incredible here: astronomy diplomacy. Why astronomy? Well, because you can't really politicize the stars, right? It's scientifically rigorous but strategically neutral. The steps here are ingenious. Step 1, deploy mobile telescope programs. These completely bypass the vulnerability of brick-and-mortar buildings. Step 2, establish digital classrooms around these scopes, fostering cross-border scientific engagement. And finally, Step 3, implement robust remote learning systems. Together, these steps create a low-cost, virtually indestructible educational corridor that maintains absolute continuity, even when traditional diplomacy completely stalls out. It's a real game-changer.
Now for Section 5, Scientific Corridors, Israel-Palestine, Post-Conflict Educational Architecture for Institutional Stabilization.
In what is unarguably one of the most politically sensitive and fragmented educational environments in modern history, educational disruption is often structurally embedded through mobility restrictions and severe infrastructure damage. VOC's data impartially highlights that establishing formal scientific corridors is a completely non-negotiable piece of post-conflict architecture. Future peace frameworks that focus solely on military ceasefires and territorial lines will inevitably fail if they ignore the stark reality of total workforce depletion. By reconstructing higher education pathways and intentionally creating neutral scientific exchanges, ones that are strictly immune to daily political fluctuations, you implement actual technological equity. It's about building an intellectual floor that prevents a society from completely collapsing while the diplomats negotiate.
Finally, Section 6, a new blueprint for peace, reconceptualizing long-term stability through intellectual capital.
This brings us to a defining insight from VOC's research that, honestly, fundamentally rewrites how we should view global stability. I'll read it directly. Nations increasingly decline not only when economies weaken or conflicts intensify, but when educational systems fail to reproduce populations capable of sustaining institutional continuity under rising systemic complexity. In other words, if the classrooms remain empty, it really doesn't matter who officially wins the conflict. You have already lost the future managers of your water grids, your hospitals, and your society. Educational accumulation truly is the ultimate bedrock of civilizational survival. Knowing that classrooms are just as strategic as border checkpoints, we absolutely have to rethink international aid and stability from the ground up. If education is indeed the highest form of strategic infrastructure, then defending a laboratory is just as vital as defending a physical border. So I want to leave you with this critical thought to ponder long after this explainer ends. In our ongoing efforts to build global peace, are we spending far too much time trying to silence the guns and not nearly enough time trying to keep the schools open? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the hidden architecture of global stability. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.